Hey guys, so with the Dawn of the Hunt update, a lot of things were added to support the Bleed playstyle. And I think that begs the question, is Bleed actually good in Dawn of the Hunt? And I think the perfect way to answer this question really is to take a look at what made Bleed so bad or mediocre in patch 0.1 and see what, if anything, has been addressed. So I've listed on the screen here what I think were the weaknesses of Bleed in patch 0.1. Now, you guys might have more that I don't have on this list, so if there are any, let me know down in the comment section below. But this is what I think made Bleed weak in patch 0.1. So let's go down the list. First one, there were no skills that innately applied Bleed. This meant that there was nothing to really support the playstyle in terms of like adding more magnitude within the skill itself, but also on top of that, that meant that you always had to either A, add the lacerate gem onto your support gems and take out a support gem slot, and also B, make it so that you had to build bleed chance on your tree. So both of these things really kind of took away damage from the tree and your support gems to make it so innately, at the end of the day, your bleeds were just going to be weaker than they should be. The second one was that there were only a small number of bleed magnitude nodes on the passive tree. And that was another reason why bleed wasn't that good, because you just weren't really able to scale it that well in patch 0.1. And 3, this is one of the biggest ones. Bleeds were actually a bit bugged because you weren't able to aggravate them at all, other than by making the monsters move themselves. I actually did a test on this on my channel in another video. If you guys want to watch that, it's really about scaling bleed damage. I'll link that in the description below. But in that video, we tested all the different ways to aggravate bleeds outside of making the enemy move, whether it be unique items or other things, and none of them actually worked. So that whole 100% more damage from bleeds wasn't actually being applied. So you're basically missing 2x damage. So your damage was halved in patch 0.1, which really sucked. And then the other thing is that there was a real lack of AoE because there was no real support gems or heralds or anything that really supported the bleed playstyle. It really sucked to try to clear with just bleed itself. It really, at the end of the day, just meant that you were using a regular physical skill or whatever and had bleed attached to it, but really, mainly your physical skill was there to clear mobs, and your bleeds really kind of came in when you were using your single target skills against bosses. And kind of leading into that, the other thing that really sucked was that you weren't able to bleed through energy shield. That was like really, I think, the biggest reason why the bleed gameplay style kind of sucked. And the fact that they changed that this patch really helped out a lot. And with that, and the other reason, the last reason I have on here is that there was a heavy reliance on skills that hit hard. So things like Hammer of the Gods or Snipe or Plasma Blast. Those were often used to pair with bleeding, and that was kind of the only way that you could make bleed work. And it was mainly because, one, again, there weren't really many bleed skills to begin with, but two, the way that bleeds and ailments work, the damaging ailments, they work in a way that the more damage that you do on the initial hit, the bigger the ailment itself. And with the lack of magnitude nodes and way to get bleeds on the enemies, and also, most importantly, not being able to bleed through energy shield, it meant that you had to have a really strong hit to, one, get rid of the energy shield, but two, be able to apply a huge bleed stack. Well, not really even stack, because bleeds can't stack, so just a huge bleed. So those are the reasons why I think that bleed really wasn't that great in patch 0.1. So let's go over whether or not these were fixed in the Dawn of the Hunt update. So number one, there was no skill that innately applied bleed, and that has been remedied, sort of. Now, Rake is the one skill that we got in Dawn of the Hunt that made it so that bleed was an innately built in, it was innately built into the skill. And that does solve the problem-ish. I say ish because that means that if you want to play a bleed playstyle, a lot of times you really could only play Rake. That's kind of the only thing that you have. But they also added incisions, which allow you to bleed without having a innate skill that added bleeding. It's kind of like lacerate, but except this one also makes it so that your damage goes up. So it's kind of a 2-in-1 gem. So I think that because of that, bleed has been somewhat supported in terms of the skill department. I'd still say that this needs more, so I wouldn't really say that it got completely addressed. So we're going to give this one a somewhat of a pass. Now, the next one, there are only a small number of bleed magnitude nodes on the passive tree. And let's take a look at that together. So this is going to be the 0.1 passive tree. And I've highlighted all the bleed magnitude nodes on this tree. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 nodes. So only 11 nodes. Actually, there were some up here, I believe, or 12, right? But if you're up here, you're really not playing bleeds, unless you're pathing down here. And if you're pathing down here, you're not grabbing that. So I'm not really going to count that. You have 11 to 12 nodes that really helped with bleed magnitude. Now, on the flip side, let's take a look at the patch 0.2 tree. How many did they have? So last we had 11 or 12, right? So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So, and up here, 16. So we have a couple more bleed nodes on the tree, specifically around bleed magnitude. Now, the difference between 12 and 15, 16 nodes, I wouldn't say that's a huge difference. But the one thing is that the spear gameplay style, right, with rake, with everything, really does lend itself to bleed itself. And the fact that they did add these bleed magnitude nodes kind of closer to the Huntress tree, sorry, I said Ranger earlier, Huntress tree, I think it does help quite a bit, even though there aren't that many of them. So is this an addressed problem? I would probably say it's in the same camp as before, and I would give it a kind of a middling rating. So somewhat addressed, not really fully addressed. So there's number 2. Number 3, aggravated bleeds were bugged. This was definitely addressed. So you can now aggravate bleeds with the items like the helmet, the boots, your spear for the Huntress. All these things aggravate bleeds, and there's also a node on the tree that aggravates bleeds as well, a keystone. So it got fixed, and that's really, really good because that means we get 2x more damage on our bleeds whenever we aggravate it. We were missing 2x our damage. That is crazy. Now, 4, there was a real lack of AoE. As I mentioned earlier, bleeds just couldn't propagate. They couldn't go to other enemies. It couldn't spread. And as a result, it really was your physical attacks that were going to be spreading or doing the AoE damage. And with this, we did get some support, specifically with Herald of Blood and Hemocrystals. Now, in my experience playing this game with bleed build, unfortunately, Herald of Blood at the end of the day just doesn't really do all that much damage in my opinion. It's definitely nothing compared to Herald of Ice, Herald of Thunder. It's really not killing things on its own because the damage is always pretty much scaled off of blood loss, right? There is a small physical damage portion of Herald of Blood, but unfortunately it's just not that big. So as a result, it really doesn't do all that much damage. So it does help in AoE in terms of the fact that, Hemocrystals pops up, then you can kind of do damage in an AoE. But if we're really comparing it to last season's Herald of Ice, Herald of Thunder, it's nowhere close to that. But the thing is that this season, in terms of AoEs, things really have been kind of brought down a level. So they're not as crazy as they were before, unless you're playing Lightning Spear, but I'm not going to count that. I think that that's an outlier. I'm probably going to get addressed at some point. So in terms of bringing AoE up to the level that other skills are, I'd say it was fairly addressed. So I would give this one a green, a good to go. It really did get addressed and brought the skill up to par with the rest of them. Again, not as strong as Herald of Ice or Herald of Thunder, but I do think that the Hemo Crystals and Herald of Blood playstyle does help out with the AoEs. And I've heard that there's a little bit of an interaction with Trample Toe that just kind of blasts the entire screen. So maybe it actually does work kind of like how Herald of Ice and Herald of Lightning, Herald of Thunder worked last season. I need to do some testing on that, but let's just say it's a pass for now. And then 5, the biggest one, being able to bleed through energy shield. This has been absolutely addressed, luckily, and it made it so that we can finally be able to bleed through energy shields and not worry about having to hit those enemies a million times before you could actually do your bleeds. Because the bleed node, the main bleed support, is deep cuts. And that makes it so you do 25% less damage on your initial hit. And because of that, it makes it really, really hard for you to deal damage to energy shields because you just couldn't bleed them. So now that we're able to bleed through energy shield, that absolutely saves the bleeding playstyle, in my opinion, pretty much on its own. But that's not the question whether or not it was saved, it's whether or not it's good. So while it was saved, I don't know if it's good yet. Now let's take a look at the last one though. There's a heavy reliance on skills that hit hard. So one, we got this, so that makes it already a lot better to where you don't need a skill that hits as hard anymore. You can use a skill that hits kind of a soft hit, but then as long as you have the bleed magnitude to support it from deep cuts, from the passive skill tree, from support gems, all that, you're able to use a skill like Rake, which innately has a very small kind of base damage, but has a high amount of bleed magnitude on it. So you're able to play that playstyle where you're not just having to rely on a Hammer of the Gods or a Plasma Blast or a Snipe to make bleeds work. So I would say that this was addressed. So if we look at this list right here, I'd say everything was addressed at some degree. Now, I would say that these 4 are much more completely addressed, whereas these 2 still, I'd say, are lacking. So there is definitely more to be done with the bleed playstyle. But is this good enough to make the bleeds playstyle good, meta, whatever you might want to call it? In terms of priorities, of course, this one was the most important, and then followed up by this one. And then we need the lack of AoE was probably the next one. And I'd say these 2 are kind of not super important because we always did have the ability to bleeds and the ability to scale it, but it just wasn't at a level that I would say was matching up with the rest of the skills. And at this point, because again, everything did get scaled down, I would say that it really isn't that big of a deal anymore because every skill is kind of a little bit weaker. So because of that, the number of magnitude nodes and how high you can scale the magnitude doesn't matter as much. And then not having a skill that innately applies bleed, again, the reason why that kind of sucked was because it made our damage go down. But now with everybody's damage kind of lower, again, it's a little bit better. So these 2 actually aren't that important compared to these ones. And as a result, would I say that bleed is good now? I would say yes, bleed is a good playstyle. I do think that it does need some gear though, especially because the bleed playstyle right now heavily revolves around spears. And spears innately have a low base damage range. So the actual physical damage on the spear is fairly low. So you do need to supplement it with damage from other sources like rings, gloves, maybe like a unique belt or a unique shield, and make that in order to make that playstyle work. So it is a pretty good playstyle, but I would say it is fairly gear dependent. And I think a lot of people found that out through their playing of the Bleed Huntress as a league starter. People were able to make it work, but in order to reach its kind of full potential, you definitely do want to have some of those pieces of gear to make it operate well. So is it good? Yes. Is it meta? I don't think so, in my opinion. It's really hard to say though right now because Lightning Spear really just is outperforming pretty much everything else. So in reality, nothing's really meta compared to Lightning Spear. But would it be meta if Lightning Spear weren't as kind of dominant? And with that, I'm still going to say probably not. I think that even though with this problem addressed, the lack of AoE, I'd say there's still like other abilities that are really a lot better at clearing than using, for example, Rake, which is one of our only bleed skills. Or you could even say, I think a lot of people are using Spear Field to use bleeds. And while that is okay clear, it still isn't the same as somebody who's running like a Herald setup, in my opinion, like a Herald of Thunder or Herald of Ice setup. And even Poison, I'd say, might even have a better clear with Herald of Plague. So I just don't really think that it's really that great in AoE and clear, and as a result, in a game that really does focus and revolve around killing monsters quickly, being able to clear quickly, clear big screens is very important. And I think just at the end of the day, Herald of Blood just doesn't cut it. Unless, of course, maybe you're using that trample toe thing that somebody has told me. So if that's the case, then maybe. But other than that, in a normal world, a normal situation, probably not. But I will say that the single target of bleed is very strong. You're actually burning through enemies, burning through bosses really quickly when you land a crit and aggravate that bleed. It just does crazy damage. So if you're talking about single target, I think bleeds are very, very good. But AoE, not so much. And I would say that in Path of Exile, I mean, I think it's more important to have a strong AoE clear than a strong single target. You just need to have a passable single target and strong AoE to make a meta class. So is it strong in patch 0.2 in Dawn of the Hunt? It's strong in the sense that it keeps up with other abilities, so it's okay, it's good, but I wouldn't say it's like strong. So that about wraps up this video. I don't know what you guys think about bleeds, whether you think it is strong or isn't strong. If you guys disagree with me, let me know down in the comment section below and tell me why. I'm always open to conversation and would love to hear from you. And as always, if you like this type of video, please hit the sub button. It's the best way to support the channel and let me know that you like what I'm doing. Additionally, I stream every single night on twitch.tv/vSelectShiru, so I'd love to see you guys there, and maybe if you want to discuss bleeds more there, I'm happy to do that as well. But if you guys can't make it, don't worry. I'll be making more videos. So hopefully I'll see y'all on the next one. All right, guys. Peace.